Ms. Claire Whitman continues writing across the whiteboard without turning as Layla Grant sets a glass of water beside her desk, the condensation leaving a faint ring on the polished wood. Her voice moves on mid-sentence, already calling on a student in the front row while Layla's hand lingers just slightly above the surface, waiting for a glance that never comes. A boy nearby shifts his chair to make space for the teacher, not for her, and Layla pauses for half a beat, eyes adjusting, then straightens the stack of papers that were not asked for, aligning the corners carefully before stepping back. The classroom hum redirects around her, conversations resuming, attention flowing forward, and she pivots quietly toward the door, her footsteps soft against the tile, already reaching for the next task without breaking pace. Layla does not reach the door right away. Her hand rests on the metal push bar a second longer than needed, fingers adjusting their grip as if waiting for something to catch up behind her, but nothing does, and she eases the door open just enough to slip through without interrupting the flow of voices still centered at the front of the room. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hum faintly, and she pauses beside the supply cart parked against the wall, one wheel slightly angled outward, the top tray holding neatly stacked worksheets that match the one she had just aligned inside, and she lifts one, then sets it back down, then straightens the entire stack again even though it is already square. Through the narrow window in the classroom door, Ms. Whitman continues moving across the board, her marker tapping once, twice, as she underlines a solution while a student near the front leans forward, nodding, asking a question that receives a quick, precise answer without delay. Layla's gaze lingers just off-center, not quite on the teacher, not quite on the students, then shifts downward as she adjusts the strap of her apron, smoothing it flat against her waist with a motion that starts slightly uneven before settling into a practiced rhythm. A pair of students exit a nearby classroom, their conversation lowering for a brief second as they pass her. One of them glancing at the cart, then at her, then continuing on without breaking stride, and the moment stretches just long enough to be noticed before it dissolves into the usual hallway noise. Layla reaches for the cart handle, hesitates again as one of the worksheets slides half an inch out of alignment, and she nudges it back into place with the edge of her thumb, slower this time, more deliberate, then begins to push, the wheels rolling with a soft, uneven click that steadies after the first few feet. As she moves down the corridor, she adjusts her path slightly to the right to avoid a cluster of students, giving them more space than necessary, her pace recalibrating to match the flow without drawing attention. And when a teacher from another room steps out holding a clipboard, speaking to someone behind her, Layla shifts the cart just enough to clear the doorway, pausing until the conversation passes fully before continuing. Her eyes track briefly toward the classroom she just left, but only for a fraction of a second, then return forward, her posture straightening as she rounds the corner toward the main office, where the front desk secretary flips through a stack of forms without looking up, and Layla stops beside the counter, placing a set of completed attendance sheets down with both hands, aligning them carefully with the edge, waiting in silence as the pages on the other side continue to turn, the rhythm uninterrupted, the space holding just long enough for her to remain there before she gently slides the stack an inch closer and steps back, already turning the cart toward the next hallway before any acknowledgement arrives. Layla keeps the cart moving down the second hallway, the wheels now steady, the soft click fading into a near-silent glide as she adjusts her pace to match the passing traffic, her hand shifting slightly on the handle when a locker door swings open a few inches too far into her path. She angles the cart just enough to pass without contact, then straightens it again, her movement precise but a fraction delayed, as if recalculating space that should have been obvious. At the end of the corridor, she pauses outside another classroom, a clipboard tucked under her arm, and knocks once with her knuckle against the doorframe. Light, professional, waiting. Inside, a teacher stands near the projector, speaking to a cluster of students gathered close, their attention pulled inward, and though the knock lands clearly in the quiet between sentences, the teacher continues without turning, finishing a point, then shifting to the next, her hand gesturing toward the screen. Layla remains where she is, the clipboard sliding slightly against her sleeve as her grip adjusts, her weight shifting from one foot to the other in a small, contained motion that settles quickly. A student near the door glances back, meets Layla's presence for a brief second, then looks forward again as the teacher calls on someone else, the rhythm inside uninterrupted. Layla lowers the clipboard half an inch, then brings it back up, aligning the top edge with her forearm as if preparing to step in. But she does not move, not yet. The seconds stretch, not long enough to demand attention, but long enough to register, and when the teacher finally turns, it is not toward the door but toward a different student raising a hand near the window, her line of sight passing just short of Layla without settling. Layla inhales quietly, the motion visible only in the slight lift of her shoulders, then taps the door frame once more, softer this time, and when there is still no break in the conversation, she eases the door open a few inches, just enough to slide the attendance sheet onto the nearest desk inside, placing it carefully so it does not disrupt the papers already there. She waits a fraction of a second after setting it down, her hand lingering near the edge of the desk as if anticipating a response, then withdraws it smoothly, closing the door with a controlled, soundless push. Back in the hallway, she adjusts the strap of the clipboard, her finger smoothing along the metal clip before she shifts the cart forward again, her pace slightly quicker now, not rushed but more decisive, as if choosing movement over pause. Farther down, near the science wing, she stops again at a supply closet, unlocking it with a key from her pocket. The metal turning with a small resistance that makes her pause mid-rotation before completing the motion, and inside, she reaches for a stack of fresh paper reams, lifting one, then another, stacking them onto the cart with careful alignment. For a brief moment, she places one ream slightly off-center, notices it, and adjusts it back into line, her hand steadying as the motion repeats more cleanly the second time. When she closes the closet door, a teacher passing by thanks someone behind her. Without looking toward Layla, the word landing in the space just beside her rather than on her, and Layla's head turns a fraction as if to locate the direction, then returns forward, her posture settling again into its neutral line. She pushes the cart onward, the hallway opening into a wider common area where voices echo slightly, and as she crosses through, a group of students parts just enough to let her pass, their conversation dipping for a beat before rising again behind her. The shift, subtle but noticeable. Layla does not look back this time, her gaze fixed ahead, her hand steady on the handle, the earlier hesitation replaced by a quieter, more contained rhythm, her movements aligning one after another without pause, as if each task completed cleanly leaves no space for waiting at all. Layla steers the cart back toward the same classroom, the stack of fresh paper steady beneath her hand, and stops just outside the open doorway where Ms. Whitman stands mid-lecture, her voice measured, her attention fixed on a student near the front. Layla waits, the cart angled slightly inward, her fingers resting along the edge of the top ream, then shifting once, a small adjustment that does not settle. A half-second passes, then another, the rhythm inside unchanged, the teacher's sentence continuing without a glance toward the door, and Layla's hand lifts from the cart, hovers briefly in the air as if about to knock, then lowers again. Her gaze moves from the teacher to the empty corner of the front table where extra materials are usually placed, then back, then down to the papers. She exhales softly, barely visible, and after a short, contained pause, she steps inside without waiting, her shoes quiet against the tile as she crosses the edge of the room. A few students near the aisle shift their eyes toward her, not fully turning, just enough to register the movement, while Ms. Whitman's voice falters for a fraction of a beat before continuing, slightly sharper, as she underlines a point on the board without looking back. Layla places the paper stack on the front table, aligning it carefully with the corner, her hands moving slower than usual on the first placement. Before correcting the angle with a precise slide, for a brief second, she remains there, not waiting this time, just ensuring the stack is stable, then steps back, turning toward the door. Ms. Whitman pauses mid-sentence now, just long enough to shift her stance and reposition the marker in her hand, her gaze flicking past Layla without landing, then redirecting immediately to another student, calling on them with a tone that tightens the room's focus. The air holds differently for a moment, a few students glancing between the board and the front table, their attention stretching before settling again. Layla reaches the doorway, her hand finding the frame slightly off-center before adjusting to the edge, and she exits, closing the door gently behind her. In the hallway, she straightens the front of her apron with both hands, the motion not as fluid as before, then returns them to the cart handle, her grip firmer now, her pace resuming with a steadier, more deliberate push as she moves on without looking back. Layla rounds the corner toward the administrative office just as the bell rings, the hallway filling with a sudden surge of movement that presses against the cart from both sides, and she slows instinctively, adjusting her grip as a shoulder brushes too close to the stacked paper. She steadies it with one hand, then continues forward, angling toward the front desk where a red folder sits half open beside a blinking phone line. The secretary is speaking into a headset, her tone clipped, nodding at something on her screen while flipping through a separate stack of documents, and without looking up, she slides the red folder an inch closer to the edge of the counter as if marking it for the next person. Layla stops in front of the desk, the cart parallel to the counter, and reaches for the folder, her fingers pausing just above it for a brief second before lifting it fully. Inside, a printed schedule is clipped to the front page, bold letters across the top reading District Observation Rotation, with a list of classrooms and times, several already checked off, one line circled in blue ink, Whitman, Room 214. Materials required. Layla glances at the clock on the wall, then back at the list, then toward the hallway she just came from, her hand tightening slightly on the edge of the folder. The secretary continues speaking, turning her chair a few degrees to the right, laughing softly at something in the call, her attention fixed away from the counter. Layla shifts her weight, the folder still open in her hand, and waits, just long enough for the pause to feel deliberate, but no acknowledgement comes, not a glance, not a break in the conversation. A teacher approaches from the side, leans in to ask a quick question, and the secretary responds immediately, covering the phone with her palm for a second, giving a clear answer, then returning to the call without missing rhythm. Layla's eyes move between them, then back to the folder, then to the cart, where the fresh paper sits aligned, ready. She closes the folder halfway, then opens it again, adjusting the top page so it sits flush under the clip, her movements precise but slightly slower than before. The circled line remains fixed in her view, the time printed beside it now less than 10 minutes away. She looks toward the hallway again, then back at the desk, her hand hovering near the edge of the counter as if considering placing the folder back, but instead she holds it, her fingers shifting position once, twice, before settling. The secretary turns her chair again, now facing slightly away, her voice lowering as she continues the call, one hand gesturing mid-air as if speaking to someone in the room who is not there. Layla inhales quietly, then slides the folder onto the cart, placing it beside the paper stack, aligning it with the edge as if it belongs there. She does not ask, does not signal, just adjusts the position until it sits square, then grips the cart handle and turns it toward the hallway. The movement is smooth at first, then catches slightly as one wheel hits the edge of a tile seam, and she corrects it, pushing forward with a firmer, more deliberate motion. Back in the corridor, the flow of students has thinned, leaving longer stretches of quiet between footsteps, and Layla moves through them with a steady pace. Her eyes fixed ahead, she passes the classroom she had entered earlier, the door still closed, voices inside muted but continuous, and she does not stop this time, her path carrying her farther down the hall before slowing again near the intersection that leads to room 214. She stops there, just short of turning, her hand resting on the cart handle, the folder visible at the corner of her vision. For a brief moment, she remains still, the hallway empty enough that the hum of the building becomes noticeable, air vent cycling, distant lockers closing. She glances at the clock mounted above the intersection, then back at the folder, then toward the direction of the room. Her fingers tap once against the handle, a small, contained motion, then stop. She shifts her stance, adjusting her footing by a few inches, then repositions the cart so it faces directly toward the classroom. The decision does not show in her face, only in the alignment of her movement, and she begins to push forward again as she approaches the door to room 214. It opens from the inside, and a student steps out, nearly colliding with the cart before catching themselves, murmuring a quick apology without fully looking up. Layla pauses to give space, the cart angled slightly to the side, and the student slips past, rejoining the hallway without breaking pace. Inside, Ms. Whitman's voice carries clearly now, measured and firm, guiding the class through a sequence of steps. Her attention locked onto the students near the front. Layla stops just outside the threshold, the folder now in her hand again, her thumb holding the page open to the circled line. She waits for a break in the sentence, a shift in tone, anything that might signal an opening, but the cadence continues uninterrupted, one explanation flowing into the next. A student raises a hand, and Ms. Whitman responds immediately, stepping closer, her body angled away from the door, her focus narrowing further. Layla remains where she is, the folder steady, her grip tightening slightly as the seconds pass. She lifts her hand halfway, not to knock yet, but enough to test the space, then lowers it again. The motion controlled but not fully smooth. The paper inside the folder shifts slightly, and she adjusts it with her thumb, pressing it flat against the backing. Inside the room, a few students glance toward the doorway, their attention lingering for a second longer this time before returning to the board. As if aware of the presence that has not been acknowledged, Ms. Whitman continues speaking, her pace quickening slightly, filling any potential gap with more explanation. Her back still turned, Layla shifts her weight again. One foot stepping back half an inch, then forward, her posture correcting itself as she steadies the folder against her side. The clock ticks closer to the mark time, each second narrowing the margin. She looks once more toward the teacher, then at the students, then down at the circled line, her breathing even but more deliberate now. She does not knock, not yet, but she does not leave either, holding her position at the edge of the doorway, suspended between waiting and acting. The task in her hand remaining unfinished, the room ahead continuing as if she is not there at all. Layla does not knock, her hand remains lifted near the edge of the doorframe for a second longer, then lowers slowly until her fingers rest against the folder pressed to her side, the paper inside shifting just enough to make a soft, dry sound. Inside, the explanation continues, but the pace has changed, not faster, not slower, just slightly more measured, as if each step is being placed more carefully than before. A student near the aisle glances toward the doorway again, this time holding the look a fraction longer, then returns to their notes without writing anything new. Layla shifts her stance by an inch, redistributing her weight from her left foot to her right, the movement controlled but not entirely fluid, and her thumb slides along the edge of the folder, smoothing a corner that does not need smoothing. The clock above the hallway clicks forward, the sound faint but distinct in the brief gaps between sentences, and Layla's gaze lifts toward it, pauses, then drops back to the line circled in blue. Inside the room, Ms. Whitman's marker hovers just above the board for a beat before touching down again. Her hand steady, her body angled slightly more toward the center of the room than before, though her eyes still do not land on the doorway. The air holds differently now, quieter in a way that is not silence, just less movement, fewer interruptions, as if the room is waiting without acknowledging that it is waiting. Layla inhales, then exhales slowly, the motion visible only in the slight rise and fall of her shoulders, and she adjusts the folder again, aligning it more tightly against her side, her fingers pressing along the spine with a careful, deliberate motion. A student near the front stops mid-writing, their pencil hovering above the page, then resumes after a second, the line slightly off from the one before. Layla's hand lifts again, not fully this time, just enough to hover near the door, then lowers halfway, her fingers brushing lightly against the wood before settling back. She tilts her head a fraction, listening for a break that does not come, her posture straightening again as if resetting. Ms. Whitman shifts her stance, stepping one foot to the side, her gaze moving across the room in a slow sweep that passes near the door, not stopping, but not entirely skipping it either. A brief hold that is almost something, then gone. The hallway behind Layla remains still, the earlier movement replaced by a quiet stretch where no one passes, and the absence of footsteps lingers longer than expected. Layla's grip tightens once on the folder, then relaxes, her fingers adjusting their position again, more carefully this time, as if conserving motion. She looks down at the circled line once more, then closes the folder halfway, then opens it again to the same page, the action slower, more deliberate than before. If this moment lingers with you, it is because nothing is happening, and yet everything is being held in place. Inside, the marker stops again for a fraction of a second before continuing, and the room breathes in that pause, then moves on. Layla remains at the threshold, not stepping in, not stepping away, her presence suspended in the narrow space between the door and the hallway, her movement smaller now, contained, each adjustment measured. As the time marked on the page approaches, without being called, the projector flickers once, then freezes mid-slide, the equation on the board no longer matching the numbers displayed on the screen, and a low murmur moves through the room as a student near the front raises a hand halfway before lowering it again. Unsure, Ms. Whitman taps the remote, once, then twice, her thumb pressing harder the third time, but the image remains locked, the cursor blinking in the wrong place, the sequence out of order. She steps closer to the laptop on the desk, glancing at it briefly, then back to the board, her rhythm breaking for the first time as the class waits. Layla shifts at the doorway, her eyes moving from the frozen slide to the stack of papers on the front table, then to the open folder in her hand where the printed sequence is listed clearly. One step circled, the same step now missing from the projection. She takes a small step forward without waiting, her hand lifting slightly as she reaches the front table, placing the folder beside the laptop, turning it just enough so the page faces outward. A student leans forward, noticing first, then another, their attention pulling toward the printed page. Ms. Whitman pauses mid-motion, her hand hovering above the keyboard, her gaze dropping to the folder, holding there for a second longer than before. The room quiets fully now, no shifting, no side conversations, just the faint hum of the projector. Layla slides one paper from the stack, aligning it with the printed sequence, then points lightly to the circled step, not speaking, just holding the position steady. Ms. Whitman straightens slightly, her eyes moving from the page to the screen, then back again, the connection settling in the space between them. She reaches for the keyboard, taps once, then scrolls back, correcting the sequence, the missing step reappearing on the projection. The equation on the board aligns again with the screen, the numbers falling back into place. A student exhales softly, another nods, and the room shifts from waiting to following. Ms. Whitman does not look away this time, her gaze resting on the folder for a brief moment before lifting toward Layla, not fully meeting her eyes, but no longer passing through. Layla lowers her hand, steps back once, her movement measured, then steadies the stack of papers with a light touch before turning toward the door. No one resume speaking immediately, the pause holding just long enough to mark the change before Ms. Whitman continues, her voice returning, but slower now, each step grounded against the corrected sequence. Layla reaches the doorway, her hand finding the frame without searching this time, and exits, leaving the folder open on the desk, the circled step visible, the room's attention anchored where it had not been before. Ms. Whitman does not resume immediately after speaking, her marker hovers just above the board, then lowers slowly as she turns halfway toward the desk, her eyes settling again on the open folder, not briefly this time but long enough to hold. The class remains quiet, their attention following the shift, a few students leaning slightly forward as if waiting for direction. She reaches for the folder, adjusts it a few inches closer to the laptop, aligning it more squarely with the edge of the desk, then glances once at the corrected sequence on the screen before speaking again, her voice measured, but with a slight pause between steps that was not there before. As she explains, her gaze moves across the room, then returns to the front table, then back again, a pattern forming that does not fully exclude the space near the doorway. Layla has not stopped, she moves the cart a few feet down the hallway, then pauses, turning back just enough to check the alignment of the remaining papers, her hand smoothing the top stack with a light, even motion before continuing. Inside, a student raises a question, and Ms. Whitman begins to answer, then stops mid-sentence, her eyes flicking once more toward the folder, then shifting toward the door as if recalibrating where the next point should land. She finishes the explanation, but slower, each word placed with more care, her posture no longer angled entirely away from the entrance. Another student glances toward the door, then toward the front table, then back to the board, their attention moving in a small loop that did not exist earlier. Layla adjusts her grip on the cart handle, her fingers tightening briefly before settling, and she steps forward again, her pace steady, neither hurried nor hesitant. As she passes the open doorway of another classroom, a teacher inside pauses mid-sentence to allow her to pass, a small break in rhythm that echoes the shift happening behind her. Back in room 214, Ms. Whitman steps closer to the desk, placing the marker down for a moment, her hand resting near the folder as she scans the printed sequence again, then lifts the marker and continues, this time referencing the corrected step directly, her tone acknowledging the structure without naming its source. A student nods, another adjusts their notes to match, the movement spreading across the room in small, synchronized motions. Layla reaches the end of the hallway, stopping briefly at the intersection again, her body turning slightly as if to listen, then returning forward, her posture straightening as she resumes her route. Inside, Ms. Whitman pauses once more, her eyes lifting toward the doorway, holding there for a fraction longer than before, then shifting back to the class, but not with the same dismissal as earlier. She calls on a student, then waits a beat longer for the answer, her timing adjusted, the space between question and response widened just enough to be felt. The room follows this new rhythm, quieter, more attentive, the earlier flow replaced by something more deliberate. Layla continues down the hall, her movements consistent, her hand steady on the cart, the earlier hesitation replaced by a controlled, even cadence. Behind her, the classroom no longer moves as if she had never been there. The folder remains open on the desk, its position unchanged, but its presence now part of the room's structure, and Ms. Whitman's attention, though still measured and controlled, no longer passes over that space without stopping. The lesson continues, but when a student at the back raises a hand, Ms. Whitman does not move on immediately this time. She pauses mid-step, the marker still in her hand, and waits, her eyes shifting across the room before settling briefly toward the doorway, then back to the student, giving them the space to speak fully before responding. Her pace adjusts again, slower, more deliberate, and when she turns to the desk, she reaches for the folder without hesitation, lifting it and placing it closer to the center where it remains within view, no longer at the edge. Layla passes by once more in the hallway, the cart rolling steady, and for a moment, Ms. Whitman's gaze follows through the doorway, holding just long enough to register. Then she speaks again, referencing the sequence with a slight nod toward the page instead of bypassing it. Inside the room, students return to their notes, the earlier stillness dissolving into a normal rhythm. Chairs shifting, pencils moving, attention redistributing evenly. Layla does not stop, does not turn back, her posture unchanged as she continues down the corridor, her hand steady on the handle. Behind her, the doorway remains open, and this time, it does not feel like a space that erases. If you felt that shift, share your thoughts and consider subscribing for more stories like this, and thank you for being here.